I'm Jimmy. Servus Freunde, my name is Jimmy Cage and the two Guardians of the Galaxy movies are my two favorite movies in the entire MCU. I'm just really into this combination of this group of lovable misfits, opening up the Marvel world to enter space, and of course writer and director James Gunn's unique and peculiar style and humor. Before the first Guardians of the Galaxy came out almost 10 years ago in the summer of 2014, I thought it would be a pretty obnoxious film. Because at the time I was working in a movie theater and the trailer with that iconic Ooga Chaka, Ooga 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 Chaka was playing constantly, which was just super irritating after a while. But to my big surprise, I absolutely loved the film. And when the sequel came out 3 years later in 2017, I thought Gunn did it again. And to this date I'm going back and forth about which one of the two I like more. It really took a while, but now we are finally getting the third one. Remember, at one point James Gunn has been fired by Disney to then be reinstated. He has created his own The Suicide Squad for Warner Brothers before he now will be in charge of their whole DC department going forwards. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is like a small farewell to this group of superheroes, even though probably most of them will return in some other films in the future. But it's certainly a farewell for James Gunn. He has been one of the most influential voices in the MCU, and love it or hate it, but you can certainly feel his handwriting all over this latest one. It has only been 2 days since I saw it, and I honestly don't quite know yet how I feel about it. And it's a little bit difficult to say how much it's the movie itself and how much it's me and my growing fatigue and oversaturation with movies like this. Well, I think it's a good movie, but after I have really loved the first two films, I was like a little bit bummed out about myself, because sitting there in the theater, I just didn't feel the same excitement anymore, the same warmth, the same heart. And it's not as if the movie doesn't have that, but we have certainly been there before, and at this point the major difference is only that it's even bigger, but also louder and messier. At its heart, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 tells a pretty simple and intimate story. One of the team, Rocket Raccoon, gets deeply injured, and the rest has to find a way to help their friend. Fittingly, the big villain this time around is the High Evolutionary, played by Chukwudi Iwuchi. He's the one who created Rocket in the first place. A powerful and obviously quite mad scientist, a godlike figure who is obsessed with creating the perfect species and populate his own perfect worlds. Which obviously is not going to happen. And instead his path is filled with pain and death for the people and creatures he experiments on. Through several flashbacks we get the backstory of Rocket, and James Gunn doesn't shy away from putting some really dark and disturbing imagery into his film. This is probably one of the most graphical and intense PG-13 movies. And I like weird, and I like dark, and I like violent and disturbing things. But it's also not the easiest thing to balance these tones, because as you expect, Guardians is also still a very fun space action adventure, and I would say still mostly works, even though the movie runs the danger of getting suffocated under its own weight. And not just in terms of drama or emotional turmoil, but also because it's more or less a 2.5 hour long superhero action movie that barely stops. There are a few quieter moments, and fortunately it's still driven by the characters. And this team, the performances, the heart, it's still there for sure. But after being exposed to almost 2 decades of pretty superhero-centric blockbuster cinema, I can't shake the feeling of being just a little bit over it at points. I'm really happy that this movie at least looks as good as it does. The character and production designs alone, it really feels as if James Gunn can do whatever he wants and put on screen whatever he likes, no matter how grotesque, weird or sometimes violent something looks. And I think that's great. It's a movie that feels personal, yet it's also one that's so full with stuff that it might become just too much. And even with the Rocket flashbacks, I feel like it's doing too much. I wasn't the biggest fan of how we are jumping back and forth between our team being on this fetch quest, and then again seeing how Rocket was treated by the High Evolutionary in the past and how he made friends with these other heart-wrenching creatures that were experimented on. The flashback structure feels a bit weird and sloppy, to be honest. The High Evolutionary himself is also not as interesting as he might could have been, and in the end he just screams a lot. Not the worst villain, but also not that thought-provoking. And unfortunately, despite Rocket being his child, so to speak, the connection between them, and especially between him and the rest of the team, who only gets to meet him at the very end, isn't that strong. And maybe another issue that I felt with this movie is that the theme of family and belonging is really not that fresh anymore at this point. We have seen it in 2 other Guardians of the Galaxy movies already. Sure, in most movies you only ever do variations on the typical themes, but at this point it just didn't feel that fresh anymore. The entire subplot of Gamora being dead and this new Gamora from another parallel universe not filling her spot also comes across as very one-note. She being very brutal and Peter wanting her to be as the Gamora he remembers and loved. It's not bad or anything, it's just not that well fleshed out, which might also apply to the character of Adam Warlock. To be honest, I was never the biggest comic reader, but I had a short and intense phase in which I consumed a lot of Marvel comics, and Jim Starlin's version of Adam Warlock was one of my absolute favorites. I was kind of sad that he wasn't introduced in the MCU earlier, because he played such a crucial role in the comics version of the Infinity Saga. With that being said, I really didn't expect James Gunn's movie version of Adam Warlock to be anything like the one I got to know through some comics. And it's really fine that he is way different, and actor Will Poulter is actually doing a really fun job. It's just that I think he could have been a much stronger and more driving force in the narrative. His introduction at the beginning of the movie is quite intense, but later on he's really more of a joke and you almost forget that he's also still in there before he turns up again and you are reminded that he also still exists. Now, it might seem like I was really disappointed about the third Guardians. And maybe I was to some degree because I love the other 2 just so much. But at the end of the day, it's still a pretty fun film. And a James Gunn movie that's James Gunn through and through is still so much more interesting and engaging than just some bland generic superhero something. Because this at least has some edges, some weird. And it still has these characters and it still has heart. Even though we are fairly familiar with it at this point and the magic has brushed off a little bit. And even though some of the payoffs are so telegraphed that they almost completely miss their mark. But in the end, I can't be too mad about a movie with disturbing cyborg warhawks, weird carrot characters, and touching spider rabbits. It's going overboard at times and not all the emotional beats hit. I, for example, was left rather cold by these children towards the end, but the Guardians do remain my favorite superheroes in the MCU. So in German I'd say, das große Finale und Best of Guardians of the Galaxy ist schon etwas überbordend. Die Magie ist etwas abgenutzt, die Emotionen und Themen etwas zu bekannt, aber dieses Team, vor und hinter der Kamera, fiktiv und real, ist trotzdem noch immer so stark, dass am Ende noch immer ein ziemlich unterhaltsamer und verrückter Weltraum Abenteuerfilm dabei herauskommt. I give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 7 out of 10. It's more like 7.3, but I don't do that.
Now you're just making it sad.
Alright, that's it like always. Comment below and let me know what you think about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. You can hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Letterboxd and also on Patreon, simply at TheJimmyCage. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give me a thumbs up, share, subscribe, whatever you like. And make sure you hit that bell for all I have to tell.